No, good morning, man.
Good morning, George. How are we doing today?
It's a wet day.
Yeah, the last 2 days.
Yeah, you're right. Well, all I know is that this is good for us. I'll
Yep.
take the water. I finally got my lawn mowed. Stop being the scrub on the street. My neighbor was out there looking at me as I mow my lawn. He looks at me and just goes like this. That's how many times he'd already mowed.
At least you have that kind of a neighborhood and not the ones where they call the cops on you.
No. It's a running joke because once I get going, I get a little overzealous about keeping my lawn cut,
Yes.
and so my neighbors laugh at me because I'm always the last one to do the first mow. Always the last one.
Yep.
Although I think one of my neighbors has got me beat this year. Anyway, I digress. I'm jabbering away. Hey, before we get started, you and I were talking the other day about Fed rates changes, and then we saw the market do its kind of burp effect after digesting
Yeah.
all of that. Everybody's talking about how the Dow is down again, blah, blah, blah. I read articles and I see commentary about, we think we're headed for a unique recession of sorts. So there's a gentleman who's the chief economist at National Association of Realtors, and he published an article, I think it was 2 days ago. And it was interesting because in the article, he quickly acknowledged the fact that, look, we're going to see a slowdown in home sales. He said, we are going to see a slowdown in home sales simply because of the fact that there are fewer people who are capable of buying. The affordability gap is just widening even more so. But he made two very important points. He still sees home prices ending the year comparative to last year between 2 and 3% over last year's peak pricing. So median peak pricing. Okay.
Mm.
So he still sees price increases coming. And he said, and in his analysis, as they look ahead into 2023, because of the fundamental lack of building taking place and how far behind we have over a decade worth of non-building or reduced building, he actually sees home prices going up next year another 2%.
Which is average, right? That's the normal.
So, yeah. So if you look at it, we're not the point. So fair point. We're not really heading backwards on any measure at this point in time, simply because of the fact that the demand, even though there is, concerns about inflation, concerns about rates, everything, in his note, he's talking about how he does anticipate, as you and I talked about, a flattening of mortgage rate hikes that will tamper down and settle down at some point in time. What, maybe late summer? Who knows?
Yeah.
But between all those factors together, just the fundamental need for housing it's not going away.
No.
So what buyers and sellers should be aware of is sellers, be prepared for being able to get less aggressive on your asking price. You're not going to be able to go out there and say, my house normally would be listing, quote unquote, normally $400,000. So I'm going to ask $475,000. Unless you've done massive improvements to it, what's going to warrant that kind of a price change? Coming into the second half of the year, it's not going to be just because the market is what it is. There is going to be a slowdown on that. But buyers should be prepared that sellers are still going to be able to price their homes higher, and there's still going to be a lack of inventory. So it's still going to be a competitive environment, especially for homes that have been well maintained, updated, made some improvements, or just been completely renovated recently. Those are homes that are gone.
Yep. Yeah. We're not at that point yet, and we're not going to get to that point where it's only going to be one or two offers on a good house still. Those days are definitely a little further out in the future if we get there, and it's going to require some massive building to get there.
Yeah, I'm part of what I have on my calendar today is I've got to go and look and see what the number of open permits are for our markets, because you and I tend to work with clients who are in Hartford and New Haven County. So and between those two counties, we have a tendency to see clients that are in certain towns. There's about probably a dozen towns that you and I probably frequently see come up on our bow.
Yep.
So I have to, on my list today, to look at the building permits for those towns just to see how soon can we anticipate even just new construction hitting the market in those areas. And some of those towns it's good, and some towns it's hardly at any. So, because there's only so much land to go around.
There's only so much land.
All right. Hey, listen, so I've got some questions that came up for me this week, talking to some buyers. I've got one for you. Ready? I'll kick it off and give it to you first. All right. The question from this buyer was, can I change the loan type I'm using after I'm under contract?
Oh, okay. Simple answer is Can you? Yes. We do not love to, but can you? Yes. Now, the reason for that would have to be good. So we would never do that. You know, you and I would never say, well, listen, we're just going to offer conventional. That's be like, you know, when we were just talking about, we'll just offer cash and then, you know, get a loan. I kind of feel like this is not as severe, but it's the same, you know, like, oh, we'll just offer conventional and flip to FHA. There is a reason that we have talked about extensively that people prefer one loan type over another. On the sell side, has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with your qualifications. It's just that other agents are aware of the fact that an FHA, a VA appraisal, and everything that goes with it, or sometimes even just a loan. So if we decide to go with maybe a CHFA loan, a CHFA loan, those can take longer. Although right now, I think you and I are setting a speed record for one of them. But those are all things that it is not in good faith if we knowingly go under contract with the idea that, well, we're just going to switch to one of these different loan types. Now, there are instances where we think that we're able to get you approved one way, and as we're going through the process, sometimes we go through underwriting and we're okay, we go through appraisal and we're okay, and then we go to refresh credit or something changes with your job and all of a sudden we're not quite okay. And in those instances, we can contact the appraiser, tell them they're going to have to update the appraisal to a different loan type. And you know, it's a thing. It's a big thing. It's not just you saying to me, you know, yeah, I just want to switch to FHA. So, you know, we don't love doing it, but it is possible if it's necessary.
So the underlying thing is there's not a law or a restriction against doing it.
No.
The primary thing is going in, you should know your loan type because you've gone through that whole pre-approval. But and so if you have to change, it should be for a strong reason. And like you said, I think the reason one of the reasons you gave is a really good one, which is if I had a change in employment, you know, something happened in my employment. Let's say you're working for a company, it's a service related company, and they're just not getting revenue. So they're starting to furlough people. Now you're going on furlough. Well, that could change your income outlook, which could change then your loan criteria, which would mean then you'd have to possibly go to a different loan type. Right? Is that an example?
Yeah. There's a lot of different layers to it. The way we look at overtime and variable income can be different. The way we look at job gaps can be different for different loan types. So, you know, sometimes you switch from FHA to conventional because a job gap that we thought was X amount of months is verified to be longer, and we're not able to fill in that gap in a way that FHA guidelines would allow. So now we have to try to make it work conventional. You know, it can go both ways. Honestly, there are times when we think we're trying to go FHA and we have to scramble and try to make it work conventional. So it can be any manner of things that pop up. It can actually be from appraisal. We can be going FHA, right? And something comes up that seems unavoidable, or, you know, it's something that we can't get over with an FHA loan. And now we have to go, all right, well, can we get your credit score up to make this work conventional? Can we scramble to make that happen? That is just as, it's not always a fall back onto FHA. Sometimes it's a fall, you know, up into conventional if something comes up that we say, all right, well, now we have to try to make this work the other way.
So there's a whole other set of layers that come in after that, which I won't dive into, but then that would cause us to also go back, renegotiate terms with the seller. Obviously, if we have any changes like this going on, we have to be communicating to the seller because they went under contract with a certain understanding and expectation.
Yep.
Something changing from conventional FHA may bring concern to their mind. They put requirements on the property that they didn't previously have. So so again, the question is, can I? The answer is yes. But strongly advised against doing unless there is a necessity for it. You shouldn't just be doing it because you change your mind, is the point.
No. And it can change contract terms. If you have seller credits in there,
right,
contract terms can change.
So from my perspective, if I put somebody under contract on a house and we're going in with an FHA loan, and we check that box, okay, If we hand over that pre-approval letter that states this is how it's coming in, this is the loan type that it is, the seller accepts that. If that ends up changing because the buyer says, you know what, George, I've been talking and with my wife about it, and we decided our spouse, whatever, and we decided we want to go with a different loan type, I'm going to put my hands up and say, hang on a second. Before I even have them talking to you, for example, let's say they're working with you, I'm going to put my hands up and say, hang on a second. Why?
Yeah.
Because we have to have a very strong and justifiable reason to change the contract, because that is fundamentally what changes first. It's not just the loan type that you're pursuing. Now we're changing the contract, and the seller has the right then to decline the contract if you change the term on the loan type to something they feel is unacceptable.
Yep.
So that's a great answer. Thank you, Bill.
Yep. Speaking about contracts, this is a question that I had never heard until the last 2 years. So
Okay.
this is something that I actually had to look up when somebody asked me about it, because I would say in pre-COVID, real estate markets, I had never heard of this being a thing. What is an escalator clause? When do we use it?
Well, it has nothing to do with a commercial building where you're riding up from one flight to the next. Okay, it has nothing to do with that. Okay, so I'll go back to in my old life of the corporate world, we used escalator clauses, and those were put into sales contracts. And what it was that when you rendered certain services over a period of time, then the value of those services and the cost of those services went up automatically on an escalator understanding annually. So there could be like a 5% increase on services and cost of services. It was it was predetermined, so that between the seller and the buyer, they knew that contract meant every year it was going up 3 or 5% as an escalator clause. So in real estate, it's a similar concept. What the buyer is telling the seller when you write an offer, and it's a little bit more complicated to write an offer with an escalator clause. They became a little bit more prevalent on the West Coast. That's where, and the reason why was because of the competitiveness of that market. People were going in and putting in an offer and then finding out that they missed the offer, by a fraction, because they found out what it sold for, and they look and they go, oh, we could have done that. Hey, they wanted 500,000 for, and they got 510. We could have gone 510. We would have done that. No problem. So the idea was, okay, if a buyer has the pre-approval limit, okay, so let's say their pre-approval limit is $300,000. We'll keep it simple. All right. And they're looking at a house that's $265,000. But they're in a competitive arena, and that house is going to get an aggressive showing because it's been beautifully updated. It's got a lot of nice features to it. It's just move-in ready on all fronts. And their buyer's agent, and they show up to do showings, and they see there's 4 other people in line there. So they say, okay, we're probably going to be dealing with competitive bids. What the escalator clause allows them to do is up to a maximum amount, their offer can be automatically increased. So let's say they put in an offer of $265,000 with a $1,000 escalator up to $270,000. So that means that if the seller gets in an offer for $267,000 that doesn't have an escalator on it, your offer, let's say it was you, Bill, to put in the offer, your offer automatically becomes $268,000. What the seller has to do, though, is in order to accept your contract because of the escalator clause, they have to then show you the evidence of the next competing contract that you beat out to prove that you only paid $1,000 more than what they offered. So it gets a little bit not complicated, not complex. It's just there's a little bit more, I'll use your term of layers. There's just more layers to it. Mm-hmm. But what an escalator clause gives the buyer is the ability to stay competitive after their offer has been submitted in the face of other offers coming in up to a maximum amount. So it's not an infinite. Some people will put in escalator clauses of, $1,000, $5,000. I've seen some do it with $10,000. They'll have it. They've got a $30,000 range above the purchase price. So they're 45, whatever. House is listed $250,000. They're pre-approved for $300,000. They say, hey, you know what? We'll go $10,000 increments up to $260,000, up to $280,000. So that's 3 incremental changes. So if somebody comes in and makes an offer of say $272,000, well, they're going to $280,000. So they're paying $8,000 more than that other one. So we never recommend, doing that kind of big gaps. But that's how they would get that offer.
And so if I put in an escalator clause and my offer keeps getting higher, then that means that the seller has to accept my offer, right?
if your offer is ultimately the highest offer and has the contract terms that they're looking for. Just because the price goes up doesn't mean the seller has to take it. The seller can still decline your offer. The escalator clause is not a guarantee.
It's not a magic bullet.
No, it's just a way to keep you competitive in the face of other offers going in. The seller still has the right to pick whatever offer they want. Because, so Bill, let's say that you and I are both the buyers, okay? And you put in an offer with an escalator clause of $2,000 up for a maximum of, say, $10,000. So you have 5 escalators into that, okay? So you put in an offer on a listing of $250, your FHA, you have an escalator that goes up to $260 with, five $2,000 increments, and you have an 8-week closing period. And at the end of the day, you're looking for $3,000 in seller credits. So the net to the seller is actually $3,000 less, ultimately. But so on a 250 offer going up to 260 with your escalators, but with 3,000 credits, you're at 257. Right? I put in an offer of 255 conventional with 10% down, and I can close in 6 weeks. Seller's going to take my offer.
Yeah.
Because even though they would be netting out more with you, the terms of your contract, it's a longer closing period. You're needing help to get to the finish line because you're asking for credits. And at the end of the day, you're going with a different loan type. Okay. So the escalator clause is not a guarantee that you're going to get that contract simply because you keep putting in more money. It's no different than a buyer who goes in and says, yeah, you want $300,000 for the house? Perfect example. A gentleman I'm working with right now said to me the other day, he said, George, he goes, I'm just done with this. I'm ready to just put $75,000 more on the offer. And I looked at him and I said, okay, do you think that means you get it?
Yeah.
Because just because you put in the price, the seller may look at it and go, that's great, $75,000 over my asking price. House will never appraise. Yeah. I know that. So now you have to go into a whole other set of conversations, which, God, I could go down. That's a whole appraisal gap discussion. But the point is, an escalator clause is a way to keep you competitive after your offer's been submitted in the face of other offers coming in. But it is not a guarantee.
All right.
All righty. I got one for you here. So this came up the other day. We have a buyer you and I are both working with. And I don't want to describe his scenario. But we finally determined that in the face of what he's looking to purchase, he's going to need to go FHA for a variety of reasons. But he tends to look at properties that need a little bit of love. And so he and I got into talking about an FHA 203K. He said, well, what's the difference?
Oh, yeah, a lot. So FHA.
I think I sent him your way for that.
Yeah. That would have been my only response. Oh, a lot. And a 203K loan is a renovation loan. So that means that you are building in some renovation costs into your purchase price. So your actual loan is going to include not just enough for you to purchase the home, but also an allotment to do some updates. Now, there's a range of updates that you can do with 2 different subsets of a 203K loan. There is a limited or a streamlined version, which is for, I would just call it minimal repairs. So nothing structural, no moving walls around. This could be, honestly, paint and new appliances. This could be renovating a kitchen.
What about a roof?
Be putting on a new roof. This could be simple things that are non-structural, but they all are going to fall underneath a certain price threshold as well. So if you are underneath, I think the limit's 35,000, but you also have to work in some reserves and there's some other fees that all have to fit under that umbrella. So we usually just say, listen, if you're hitting around that 20 to 25,000 mark, that's when we're starting to wonder if we're just going to go up into a full 203K. But if you're under that, we can probably make it work. Again, if it's not moving walls around with just a limited or streamline. Now the full can be a big project, so the home still has to be in decent shape. Like you can't just go where there's a foundation and say, well, yeah, I want to do a 2 or 3K to build a home here. No, that doesn't work. But you can move walls. You can do siding, roof, mechanicals, plumbing, electrical, appliances, kitchens, bathrooms. You can do all that. It all has to make sense for the market. So if you are in a range of homes that are all around $300,000, you cannot be the lone $500,000 house at the end of it. You won't get financing for that. It has to make sense. They're not going to go with FHA. They won't allow crazy things like, I want an all marble bathroom. I want the tile, I want the floor, I want the ceiling, I want the walls, I want it all to be marble. They're not going to go for that. It has to be reasonable. They will not do things like swimming pools. That's not something that you can add in under a 203K loan. So you think a 203K is more of an updating loan type. There is a conventional version, which is, allows for a little bit more extravagance. But everything still has to fall, somewhat within the realm of, okay, can this appraise for the money that we're putting into this? So if you are looking at a home and you're saying, I'm going to offer 150 and I'm going to put $150,000 worth of work into it, that home better appraise for $300,000 at the end of your renovations. Same concept applies. If it's a 150 home in a 200 neighborhood, you cannot put $100,000 into that home. It won't appraise. The value won't be there. So there are some limitations. And then with each loan type too, within each, I said there's the two. There's the streamlined or the limited, and then the full. There are different requirements for the work, for the draws, for the people who can perform the work. So it is a much more complicated loan, a much more complicated process, but it is not an impossible process. It's a great loan type now, because I think we're going to see more of these homes that are coming up that are okay and need some work to get to that next level. And I don't think people are going to be looking at them as much as those, as we've said, those really nice homes. They're going to go in 3 or 4 days probably. That's just what's happening right now because of the amount of buyers looking for that. There's not a ton of people who are out there looking at those homes that could use a little updating or a lot of updating. So it's a little bit more complicated, but I think, if you're keeping an eye out for some homes that have maybe sat for a little while, great loan type, absolutely great product, great opportunity to give yourself that value, that equity that other people are not seeing.
So there were a few things in there that I want to clarify or ask you to clarify. So, for example, the work cannot be performed by the buyer, correct?
Correct. Yeah. I think with the streamlined, if you're a licensed contractor, there is a limited scope of work that you can do. I believe with the streamlined. With the full, absolutely not. You can't do any of it.
There's a directory of FHA 203K approved contractors, which is almost all of them for all intents and purposes. I mean, it doesn't take hard. But like you said, for call it the full,
it's a process.
You need to pull somebody in that really, and I think there's isn't there a time limit, like 6 months, that the work has to be completed in?
Yep, work has to be completed. The draws have to be completed. It really is. You're tying yourself to a process up front too. You need to keep that in mind. It's not, as you're going along, you go, yeah, what would really be great if we decided to do this with the layout, of that's not, that won't be allowed. You have a timeline, you have a process. You have an agreed upon material list. I mean, it's really the full, you need a contractor who is going to work with you on it because it is more work for them. It is much more work for them. Now, great contractors probably do this type of thing anyways, like they're already
like I said,
itemizing and material, and they're already doing that. They're just maybe not showing it to you to this extent. But with this loan, I mean, it's, nails, $100, plywood, $3,000. It's
so
broken down.
The complexity of the 203K though in this scenario, or I should say this time frame, because of the constraints on the supply chain and the costs we keep seeing of raw goods bouncing around, that's something that a contractor really needs to be providing, because they're going to have the best sense of what pricing is for, if you need lumber, for example. The way I've always looked at these 203Ks when they've come up, I've always said to people, try to go with call it streamline one. I think you call that the light version.
Yep.
Simply because it's to address, and that the reason I gave the roof as an example, because that's often an issue for FHA. If a roof is at the end of its life, it has less than 2 years of life left on it based upon the age of install and the type that it is, FHA they don't pass that. Correct. So you could use a 203K to have the roof replaced. It still has to be done through that contractor, still has to be done. But does it have to be done prior to closing?
No. That is the benefit of this. So right. You get into a situation like that, and I mean, your options are either have the seller do it prior to closing, or you have to get something like this going.
Can you add on a 203K after the fact? So let's say that you've had somebody go through. So no, you have to be pre-qualified.
You have to be because the important thing to know too is, in the start, it's more you and me talking to a buyer, right? As they're looking at homes. Once we determine that this is the way we're going, your contractor is just as important as you and me in this transaction. They're going to that home with you and walking through and saying, here are the costs, here's what I think. It's not something where you put in the offer and then start making calls. It's legwork up front to make sure that you have people lined up who are going to, all right, hey, I'm going to go look at this house. I need you to come with me. All right, let's go do it. Good
point. That's a really good point. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, my turn?
Yeah, shoot. What do you got?
All right. It kind of tails into this. We've had good luck with these tailing into each other. Is a home inspection required? Can I just skip it?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
So, we've talked about the stages of buying a home before, and we'll get into that. But when you think about buying a house, you do showings, you write offers, you go under contract. The minute you go under contract, there's some paperwork and everything I have to deal with. But the first thing we're doing is we're ordering inspections. You're not required to do a home inspection. A home inspection is for the buyer's purpose. It is for their information. So it is for a buyer to understand from a third party, a licensed third party who goes through, hundreds of hours of trainings. They do hundreds of walkthroughs before they're allowed to do an independent walkthrough. There's every inspector group that I work with and know there is a very, very stringent approach to the training, because they know that what they're doing is giving you advice and counsel on the health of that house. It can be as simple as, hey, look, the outlet by the bathroom sink here is not a ground fault outlet. It should be replaced with a GFCI outlet. It can be as simple as that, that's one of the most common things that comes up, especially in older homes built before like 1960. But it can be that to the extreme of, hey, look, I was going through the basement and I saw this cracking over here in the foundation. And then next to that, I saw it looks like a little hole patching. Was there an underground tank at one point in time on this house? So then if we discover that, we go, well, wait a second, let's go back and look at the documents. So the home inspector, their job is to go through and look at the entire house. They're looking at the wiring, they're checking the doors, they're checking the windows, they're checking the outlets. They're doing all of that for the benefit of the buyer to better understand what is the health of the home I'm buying. What's the age of the water heater? Some sellers don't disclose the age because they don't know it. Well, home inspector is going to pull the serial number off the water heater. They're going to look up the date and they say, this is a 2010. So, hey, guess what? It's at 12 years. The recommended period of time for a replacement is 12 years. You should consider this. What we do with a home inspection is different. So, no, a home inspection is not required. But we always recommend that it be done, because that is the third party point of view to the health of the house. And the inspection contingency is the opportunity for the buyer to go in there, understand all of that, get that report, hear that walkthrough, go through with the inspector. I'm always there, but go through with the inspector. And they hear Bill, the inspector, say, I see a lot of damage in the joists here in the basement. Wonder if there's termites. Let's go look at the report. Yep, you did order a WDO, which is the wood destroying organism report. Okay, yep, that's tunneling right there. There's termite damage on the house. Well, now you go back to the seller and you say, hey, listen, we went through our inspection. We found out the following items. Oh, and by the way, house needs to be treated for termite. And then the seller's going to say, prove it to me. So then we hand over that portion of the report to show the WDO. We show the photos. And then the seller looks at that and goes, well, too bad. I'm not doing anything about it. Well, it's the buyer's opportunity to say, then I'm gone.
Yeah.
Goodbye. The inspection gives the buyer the opportunity to walk away for just cause to cancel that contract if there are things about the house that they feel either A, are too much for them to deal with personally, or if B, the seller refuses to negotiate with them on it. And a broker that I know well made the comment one time, an inspection, the reason for breaking due to inspection could be as simple as a light switch. If the seller refuses to address it, and that's the thing you're saying is your greatest concern, and they refuse to address it, you have the right to walk away.
Yeah.
But we do have to provide to the seller, if we're saying that these are our concerns, we have to provide the seller an opportunity to find a way to resolve that. Okay. There are some people who will use the inspection contingency and simply say, well, we found stuff in inspection, we're walking away, we're canceling. And then the seller's side is going to say, well, why?
Yeah.
What was it that came up? So use the inspection for what it's intended for, which is to learn about the house and feel comfortable that what you're buying makes sense and know about the age of things like your mechanicals. Or at the same time, use it to say, okay, hey, look, it has everything that we saw during the showing. We found a couple of little things, they checked the electric panel and there was double tap breakers. Okay. One of the more common things that comes up. Are those reasons not to purchase the house? No. Are those concerns about the house? No. Are they things that should be addressed at some point in time? Yeah. It'd be a good idea to change that. But unless you're finding things like the foundation is unsettled and it's caving at one point in the basement, you've got leaking pipes all over the place, whatever. Unless you're finding stuff like that, the home inspection is really to give you an idea. So is it required? No. Is it strongly recommended? Absolutely. I have buyers who will say to me all the time, George, do I have to do this? It's the average cost of a home inspection is $600. Do I have to do it? No, you don't have to do it. There is no requirement. The only thing you're required to do is run title. And if you're taking out a loan, you're going to be required to do an appraisal.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Not required, but definitely recommended.
I used to have buyers who would say, hey, George, we just don't care about the inspection. I mean, I have some investor buyers, for example, who will waive the inspection because they're not thinking about the issues on the home because they are licensed contractors. They've observed it for themselves, so they've chosen not to do an inspection for that reason. But 98% of the people out there buying a house are not contractors who know how to evaluate a home independently, and they're just you and me.
Yeah.
Listen, when I bought this house, I didn't know what the hell I was looking for. Did you when you bought your house?
No, I didn't know what I was getting into.
But I don't know if that's what you want to say as a lender.
Yeah, no.
All right. I got one for you and this ties now because sometimes from inspections, we find things that need to be addressed. Okay. And sometimes sellers say, hey, I'm not making the repair, but I will issue you a credit. So you found that there are a handful of GFCI outlets that should be replaced. I'm not doing it, but I'll issue a credit of $500 towards that. So great. I got $500 in credit that's going towards the purchase and closing costs, not towards the purchase, towards the closing costs. Cool. I'll add that on. And then it gets to what is the maximum amount of seller credits that can be applied to a purchase?
Yes. So first thing to say is that credits can never exceed the down payment. I'm sorry, not the down payment, the closing costs and prepaids. So you will never be getting a benefit that can go towards your down payment. You will never be getting a benefit that you will walk away from the purchase with a check. You're never going to get a check at closing. So even though there are these high limits, they still have to fall within the actual cost of purchasing the home. Now, sometimes it can give you the ability to add on some costs. Like maybe now you'll say, well, I want to use some of that extra to buy down the rate or pay upfront mortgage insurance. But just realize that you will never get a benefit above and beyond the actual closing costs and prepaids.
So if I'm buying a house and I'm going in up front and I'm requesting seller credits, let's say I'm going with an FHA purchase on a $300,000 house. Okay. What would be the maximum allowable seller credits I could request?
So if you're doing an FHA loan, they have a 6% maximum seller credit. That is the most. But again, it's very important to talk, George and I and you, and say, okay, my calculations are showing that this is going to end up costing about $8,500 to purchase in prepaids and closing costs. We cannot ask for more than that. So if that is only 3% of the purchase price, 2%, then that's what we would request. Now, it's important to know too, in some towns, the way they pay taxes, it's specifically Meriden and Wallingford, my software doesn't account for it the right way because they pay an actual arrears, or do they pay? No, they pay forward. So the way that they do taxes in those two towns means that your amount of closing costs is actually less than in other towns. So it's very important to know, for each specific purchasing scenario, what the actual structure is for that town.
So hang on, let me just pause you right there for a second, because you and I have gone through, I don't know how many times we've put together offers where we've put credits on that. And it's 9 times out of 10, I'm calling you and saying, okay, we're going to put in for credits. This is about what we're going to do. And I usually hear you tapping away on your keyboard.
Yeah.
You're plugging in to see if that's going to be the maximum, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm updating taxes and an estimate for insurance.
Right.
And then yeah, with that, because lender fees, attorney's fees are kind of set, like they don't fluctuate much. There is some title costs that do fluctuate a little bit. There's title insurance tied to the property.
Right.
Those fluctuate a little bit based off of the purchase price of the property, but most of the actual attorney and lender fees are set. And it's just me figuring out, okay, the taxes are high on this one, so we can ask for a much bigger credit because there's more prepaids and there's more that goes into funding the escrow, or the taxes are low. All right, we're going to have to keep our credit smaller on this one. So it's always that sliding scale. Again, it's very important to have that conversation up front and often before you put in that offer.
So using that $300,000 purchase price example, and FHA has a maximum of 6%, we can't go in and ask for $18,000 in credits.
No.
You're probably never going to see the maximum actually used unless it has high taxes, like you said, maybe in that case.
Yep.
But do me a favor, just play along here for a moment. So let's say that we put in, we'll stick with that $300,000 purchase price, and we'll say we went in with 2%, which is $6,000 in credits. And let's say that the maximum for credits on that property is $7,000.
Yep.
Okay. So there's two pieces that can come up here. So we went through inspection, we discovered some things. They're not detrimental to the house, but we felt like, hey, listen, the carpets are really nasty and ugly. They should have been cleaned. So we have to clean the carpets or rip them out. The sellers decided to issue $500 in credits for cleaning the carpets. We found there's 3 GFCIs that should have been replaced. They've agreed to $250 for those GFCIs. We found that there's a double tap in the breaker. They agreed to another $150. So we also were at $1,000. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a door, and the screen door was broken, during a windstorm. And the seller said, "Hey, look, I'm just not going to replace it, but I'll give you another $500 in credits there." So now we're $500 over. Yeah. So there's two things. So because the sellers issued more credit due to those items we found at inspection, there's two approaches that can be taken here. Either A, we just flat back down to what the maximum allowable credits are, or we actually have to go in and adjust the purchase price.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or the other thing that we can do is now say, essentially, you have a little bit of a credit with me, so let's spend a little bit to buy down the rate.
So the totality of credits doesn't mean we can't potentially use it, because as you just said, there's your opportunity. But then I also look at it as, well, if you're tipping above the maximum, the next thing we do is we look at adjusting purchase price.
Yep.
Which could be just the $500.
Yeah.
Which is immaterial in the scope of things, but then you're just paying $500 less for the house. So it's important for buyers to know. I think the underlying point you made, it's important for buyers to know up front, if we're going in asking for credits, that we know the property and we know the details, so we know what to put into that offer contract, and we don't over ask on the credits.
Absolutely. And we've just been talking about FHA.
That's
For
true.
conventional, there is a scale of credits that you can ask for. On an investment property, 2% is the limit. Always, never can go over 2%. If you're doing a primary residence purchase and you're under 10% for your down payment, then you can ask for up to 3% in credits. If you're between 10% and 25% for your down payment, then you can ask for 6% in credits. And if you're 25% and up, you can ask for 9% in credits, which again, I don't know how you're going to use it, but one of the, one of the benefits, well, not necessarily benefits, but one of the things with conventional loans is that you can do upfront mortgage insurance rather than monthly. So if you're in one of those ranges, less than 20%, and you want to use a little bit extra to do maybe some upfront mortgage insurance, you have that option as well.
All right. So one last thing on seller credits, because I think this is because this comes up a lot. It goes into, I'd say 50% of the offers that were written last year had seller credits on them. This year, not so much. I think I've written one offer that had credits on it. A lot of buyers are now reluctant to request credits because they know that it can be viewed negatively by a seller. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't. It doesn't mean that you should prohibit it, because it is, as long as we write the offer correctly, it is to the benefit of both parties. Can be. But the last thing I would say on seller credits is everything that you just ran through, all the different, ranges that come in based upon loan type, based upon this. So the short answer to seller credits is we need to talk about it.
Oh, 100%.
We can't just go in. And the reason why I bring this up is because I have seen other agents go in and just arbitrarily throw a number or a percentage into an offer. And you kind of look and go, but wait a minute, based on what? So this is really helpful. I think we probably are going to come back on this topic again. And maybe what we do is we actually run through a couple of examples, because I'll be out doing some showings this afternoon. I guarantee one buyer in particular that I'm working with today, I guarantee they're going to ask again, because we talk about it with every offer. They ask, should I use credits on this offer? And we have that, and I always have to say to them, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Well, and here will be my final, you said some agents just throw in a number or percentage. It's use it or lose it with credits. If you don't use it, it's now gone.
Because like you said, there's no check coming across the table to the buyer. I mean,
Nope.
So if they put in a request for $5,000 worth of credits, and at the end of the day, they could only use $4,000. The $1,000 difference goes back to the seller.
Right back to the seller, and you financed an extra $1,000 for no reason.
Right.
So that's why you need to get it right. You don't just say, "Well, I'll just ask for $12,000, and whatever I use, I use." That will keep your closing costs to zero. Essentially, that is one way to do it, but you are just now financing an extra whatever, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 and giving it to the seller.
I am fully expecting I know what comes up later today with this conversation. Hey, listen, how much time do you have left here? You want to do another one, or you want to?
Yeah, well, I got one for you, obviously.
Okay.
I don't know if you're going to like it. George, am I required to work with a real estate agent?
No. Oh, you want me to go for it?
All right, on to the next one.
No, you're not. Okay, there are a lot. Your layers reference. There are a lot of layers in that answer. You are not required to work with an agent. You can self-represent all day long. This gets into another topic of who is required for a transaction, a home purchase, but we won't get into that right now. Specifically to your question of, so I'm assuming you were talking to one of your clients the other day who's, they came in, Bill, I'm talking about getting a loan.
Yep.
And, because you get the question periodically, I'm not working with anybody. Do you have anybody you can recommend? Or they say, am I even required to do it? I get it. Okay. The short answer again is no, you're not required. However, if you call an agent, let's say you called me and said, hey, George, can you do me a favor and show me this house at 123 Happy Street today? I am required by the Department of Consumer Protection. I am required to present you with what's called a listing representation agreement. It can be specific to that property, and it can be for a specific period of time. But the Consumer Protection, they want to make sure that consumers understand who ultimately is responsible for either party going through that transaction. And if there are fees or payments made related to that, how is that handled? That's the purpose of that agreement. Some people think that agreement means that they're locked in and they must work with that person forever and a day. Okay. We are required as agents, we are required to put that representation agreement in place in order to show a property, because again, it is for the protection of the buyer. But you can absolutely make it specific to that one property for a given period of time. Let's say it was 30 days. So that means that if that buyer at any time in that 30-day period puts an offer in on that house, they have to work with that agent who showed them that house. They cannot go over to their buddy Bill, who's also a realtor, and say, hey, do me a favor. This guy George is a knucklehead. I couldn't stand him. So do me a favor. I want to write the offer on the house and have George, and so I don't have to work with George. Bill's first question is going to be, did you sign something with George? Yeah, but it was just, it's only for like 30 days. Okay, I'll talk to you in 30 days when that agreement's no longer valid, because two agents cannot both represent the same person. That said, am I required to work with an agent? No, you can self-represent, which means you have your attorney draft your purchase contract. It means that you take responsibility of calling up, for example, the listing agent, or maybe the agent or the house rather is for sale by owner. So now you're contacting the owner because their phone number's in somewhere and you found it, and you say, hey, Bill, I saw you're selling your house. My name is George. I'm interested in buying it. Bill says, cool, I'll sell it to you. So let's go through it. So George and Bill now meet up at the house. No agents are present because it's for sale by owner by Bill. George has decided to self-represent himself. He goes up and shakes Bill's hand and says, hey, listen, I want to buy your house. I'll make you an offer. The two agree to an offer. Well, now their attorneys now need to get involved. Okay. There are so many things that come into that if that house was ever listed by an agent. Okay. What was the timing of that? Because there's a listing agreement that has to be looked at for it. But let's say it never was. It was just for sale by owner. Ultimately, no agent is required, but it is strongly recommended because for both parties, you need somebody who is looking out for your half of the transaction. Yeah. Sellers, that's why sellers work with listing agents, because sellers don't always know everything they need to know to sell the house. Listing agent's responsibility is to go through everything, from simple things like putting together the disclosure documents with them to making sure that, hey, look, you did non-permitted work on the house. We have to properly disclose that because that can become an uninsured component of the house for a buyer, and that may become a problem for the buyer. And then blah, 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 blah. If you're a buyer's agent, your job is to make sure that you're showing everything to that buyer. You're pulling up the parcel map. You're looking at it. You're checking flood insurance requirements for them. You're looking at all those things before you even suggest, should you look at that house? Yeah. And then when you go and look at it, you may go in and go, I read the disclosures on this house. Bill, they got a lot of basement water damage. Okay. So do you even want to look at this house? If you're self-representing, you're not going to do that. You're just going to go up and you're going to look at the house. So no, not required, but insanely strongly encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree, too.
All right. I got one. I'm going through my list here of questions that came up. This is one that's a little bit odd.
Okay.
And I'm going to try. All right, here's how I'm going to position this question. Because, okay, so a buyer saw a listing the other day, and there was a reference in the listing that the house had some issues with the foundation. It was moving off the foundation, okay? So automatically we know there's a defect on the house. So it was properly disclosed. That's good. But the issue is that reference is there in the notation. Okay. So when you go to purchase the house and have to have it appraised because they're getting a loan on the house, let's say they're not using that 203K that we talked about, they're just going with a loan. What happens with the appraisal process from your end?
Well, they see that note. There are certain things that once it's written down, it's written down. If it's on the, appraisers look at the listings. That's part of what they do. So if there is a note in there, an appraiser is going to 99 out of 100 times, at the very least, cover their ass. Mm-hmm. If they're looking through that property and they go, I don't really see what they're talking about here, but they will cover their ass and put a note in there that says, listing referenced foundational issues, recommend a structural engineer take a look, something like that. The moment that transfers from the listing to the appraisal report, Now my company is obligated. We absolutely must request a structural engineer come out and look at that property. So go ahead.
No, so hang on a second. So there's an important point there. So it's not you saying, hey, look, I read the listing, George, and I saw this reference here. It's you saying, let's see what comes up on the appraisal report. Because if the appraiser, like you said, if they're even paying half the attention, they're going to see something. They're still going to put a note in there because it was in the listing. You're not going to allow that purchase to proceed then.
No, because all of the risk will transfer onto us. If we close that loan, if we allow you, because remember, we're the source of the funds. If we allow funding on a loan that we know on a property that has a defect, you're going to come back to us immediately and go, hey, the right side of my house collapsed. And the appraisal said that there was a problem with the right side foundation. How did you let me purchase this house? And then now we're not looking to do it. Now we're in trouble. So it's not necessarily it sounds like it's everyone just covering their butts on this, but it's for your benefit. That is the part that sucks, is that some of these things that do come up during these processes, I know that I get people rolling their eyes and going, oh my God, I just want to buy the house. Can I just close on it? I'll take care of it. No, because we need to make sure that you're moving into a home that is move-in ready. If it's an FHA home, health and safety issues have to be accounted for. If it's a conventional home, that's not a free pass. If there's a foundational issue, a structural issue with the property, yes, the appraiser is going to call it out. We're going to see it in the appraisal report and require that gets investigated.
Remember, I want to say it was a year and a half ago, maybe, there was one I worked on where there was a notation in the listing. The seller provided a quote, actually, for work to be done in the basement, where some supports were needed because there had been some rotted beam or something. And so we all knew about it. We knew that was there. We fully expected to be noted on the appraisal as well. The seller had gone ahead, had even gone so far as to get a quote on the work to be done. So they knew that the work needed to be done to be conveyed. The quote was part of the whole thing. We received the copy of the quote, but remember what happened was it took like 8 weeks.
Yeah, for the work to actually get done.
So
that was an interesting one, I remember, because I think what we first attacked on that, because we were aware of the work, I think the first thing we attacked on that was getting the language removed from the appraisal report.
Well, yeah, because it had already been noted. I'm trying to remember how we handled that. It had already been noted in the listing. And because it was already, the seller had already acknowledged it, we knew it was work that had to be done. It wasn't anything that the appraiser discovered, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It was not a professional opinion of theirs that it needed that work. They were simply saying that they saw it in the NMLS. So I think what we tried to do was said, well, can we take it out of the NMLS? And still, my underwriter was like, dude, they said structural work. That's it. Done. He's like, no, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's got to be taken care of prior to closing.
Because the reason why was because the buyer had, not he himself as a contractor, but he had contractors he knew that could actually do the work after closing, and he wanted.
I think he used to do that work.
That's right.
I think he used to be employed by a company that did that. So he's like, yeah, the day we close, I'm calling my buddies over to do this. We know how to do it. I have the tools. But unfortunately, it needs to be from a licensed, it had to be from a licensed contractor. They had to show a scope of work. They had to show what they,
That's right.
Again, it's not just, we can't just say after it's done, all right, yeah, it's done.
No, we had to have it inspected. It had to be reviewed again. And the other thing is, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, the loan type, because of the loan type that he was using. He didn't have a rehab loan attached to it. So he didn't have the funds set aside. So that was the other thing that we looked at and said, well, we can't change anything here because at the end of the day, it properly was disclosed by the seller. But the way they disclosed it, we all looked at it and go, Okay,
Yep.
now there's just no way around this. Now, fortunately, that buyer was in a position where they were okay with the fact that the work had been done. They didn't like the fact that they couldn't do it themselves. But what became the problem wasn't the work, wasn't even the fact that the work was needed, wasn't the fact of the scope of the work, because the scope of the work wasn't even that significant, but it was how it was worded that really caused the problem. But it ultimately ended up taking, I think, almost 8 weeks. So that
Yeah.
pushed our closing out. We were supposed to be closing like in I don't remember, March or whatever it was. We ended up closing like May or something like that.
That one was not good.
But I will say this: we got it done. I'm happy to say that I don't think there's been. Oh my God, where's the wood? There hasn't been a buyer yet that you and I have not been able to work through and bring to the closing. Because we try to work this stuff out all up front and just do the best that we can for them. I think I'm going to stop there on questions because I'm looking at my list here and I can see us going down a rabbit hole with some of these other ones.
All right.
So there's a couple of questions in here, Bill. I'm going to give you a heads up. There's a couple of questions in here that I would say we should probably just kind of make as a one question session. Because they can spawn into a few ways. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that comes up a lot, and not to touch on it right now, but one of the things that comes up a lot is how I prepay my mortgage, and what goes into that, what it means, doubling up on payments, that whole thing. A lot of people start getting into, I want to be more aggressive because I want to pay down the life of the loan, blah, 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 blah. So that's something that I've been talking to buyers about more frequently lately. And I think I'm just going to turn that to you on our next session to say, let's just run that out. We've had buyers who didn't need to sell their house at time of closing for proceeds to a purchase, but then wanted to apply the proceeds after the fact. What does that look like? We've had buyers say, hey, listen, I have enough cash. I've decided I'm going to prepay for X period of time. What does that mean? We have buyers who say, listen, we want to get more aggressive on gaining equity in the house. How do we do that? And it all comes down to that mortgage payment and the handling of that. So I think that should be our next conversation. I'm just going to let you riff on that one.
Yeah, I think that's good. You can talk about recasting during that as well, which is something a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, definitely. All right, listen, I'm going to run. I got to start pulling my stuff together. Like I said, I got a fun afternoon of things. It's always good to chat, man. Anything you want to throw out there as a last?
No. Looking forward to the next one.
Okay. I'll see you later then.